Welcome to lecture 22 of financial management. We are continuing our discussion on the techniques of capital budgeting. So previously we discussed an example of IRR, and then we saw what independent and mutually exclusive projects are. In this video, we are going to understand what are conventional cash flows and what are non-conventional cash flows. And then we are going to discuss why do we need to differentiate the projects into independent and mutually exclusive. I mean, what is the reason? We have already seen what is independent or mutually exclusive projects, but what is the reason to distinguish them? And then we are going to see, why do we need to understand that whether the conventional cash flows are conventional or non-conventional. Once we explore the reason, we would know that there is an issue with IRR, and to solve that issue, we would present another advanced technique, which is modified IRR. So this is what we are going to discuss in this lecture. So first, the reason. Okay, we saw that IRR is the discount rate at which NPV is 0, right? Okay, so no matter what, the NPV and IRR, they both would give us the same decision. If NPV says that we should, if IRR says that we should accept the project, then NPV would also suggest that we should accept the project. The decision would be same. The conclusion of both these techniques would be same no matter what. Okay, so in previous examples we saw that if NPV was positive, then we would accept the project, and again, the IRR rule would also give us the same conclusion. But when would these two give us the same conclusion? When the cash flows are conventional and the project is independent. So let's see the second aspect. So IRR and NPV would always lead to the same decision if the project are independent. That is, the decision to accept or reject this project do not accept the decision to accept or reject another project. That is, they are not mutually exclusive projects. So what we mean to say is that IRR and NPV would give us the same results when the project is independent. Now, why does it matter that NPV and IRR should give us the same result? Now, understand this. If IRR says that we should reject the project and NPV says that we should accept the project, then what would be your decision? Would you accept the project or reject the project? Right? And so you get the idea that if these two are the most important techniques, and if they are giving us a contradictory conclusion, then what would the financial manager do? What decision would it make? The financial manager would make. So, anyhow, we would explore that aspect later on. But the IRR and NPV would have similar results when the projects are independent. And second, if the cash flows are conventional. Now, what do we mean by conventional cash flows? Let's move to second slide. There we would discuss conventional cash flows. Till now, we have seen this type of cash flows, where the first cash flow is negative and the subsequent cash flows are positive. Whether there is one subsequent cash inflow or multiple, we have seen this kind of an example, this project A kind of an example. Remember, in last example, our cash outflow was minus 34,000, and then we had positive cash flow for 3 years. So no matter what, you go back to the lectures that we have seen, we have discussed, you would see that we had always stick to this kind of cash flow. First is negative and the rest is positive. So this is the project A kind of cash flow. So there are multiple examples of this one. We build a factory. So when we are building a factory, we we first have a cash outflow, we invest money, then once the factory is built, then it would start producing products and we would sell the products and the cash inflow would start. So first the cash outflow would occur, then the cash inflow would happen. If we are starting in university or an education institute, then again we would first build the infrastructure or rent it out. Again we would have a negative cash flow, and once we have the infrastructure, we would start getting enrollments, and that would generate cash inflows. So first cash outflows, then cash inflows. So there are multiple examples of this kind of cash flow, and till now we had been discussing it. The second cash flow, type of cash flow, can be this cash flow where we first have positive cash flows and then we have negative cash flows. When would this occur? So for example, there is a concert, there is a conference, educational conference. So in these kind of cases, or there is a cinema, for example, movie theater. What do you do in movie theater? Obviously you would have visited it. You first buy a ticket. So first the cash inflow would occur. Then once you have bought the ticket, then there would be cash outflow. The movie would happen. In case of concerts, first the tickets are sold out. Sometimes 1 month in advance the tickets are sold out. So the positive cash flow would occur first, then after these tickets are sold out, the concert would start, and then there would be cash outflows. Similar is the case with conference. First, you would have to deposit the money, the cash inflow would occur, then the conference would happen, and there would be expenses and the cash outflow would happen. So there is this second kind of projects where first cash inflow occurs and then cash outflow occurs. In first type of projects, there is first cash outflow and then cash inflow. But then there is this third type of project where there is first cash outflows, then there is inflows, then outflows. So the sign changes itself multiple times. It can again turn out to be positive or negative, then again positive. It doesn't matter. It is not necessary that it would change the sign 2 times. It can change more than twice, or it would look like this. We first have a positive cash flow, then negative, then again positive. So now it is changing hand more than once. So in previous example, the sign would change only once, right? It turns from negative to positive 1 time, that's it. From positive to negative, that's it. But in this case, it turns from negative to positive and then again to negative. In this case, it turns from positive to negative, then again to positive and again positive and negative, right? The idea is that if sign changes more than once, then we have non-conventional cash flows, and if the sign changes just once, then we have conventional cash flows. So, okay. So this is conventional cash flow, this is conventional cash flow, this is non-conventional cash flows. This is the NPV profile of project A. Now, as the discount rate increases, the NPV would decrease. If the discount rate is higher than IRR, this is say IRR. If the discount rate is higher than IRR, then NPV would be negative. If the discount rate is less than IRR, then NPV would be positive. So anyhow, the conclusion is that as discount rate increases, NPV would decrease, because once you increase the discount rate, this cash flow would not be affected by the increase in discount rate. This cash flow would decrease, right? Once we find the present value of this cash flow, it would decrease. So it would get smaller and smaller, and as we increase the discount rate, this positive cash flow would get small. In project B, it is opposite. As we increase the discount rate, the NPV would turn out to be, and NPV would increase and would turn out to be positive. Why is that so? Because once we increase the discount rate, this negative cash flow, its value, its present value would decrease. And as it would decrease, the NPV would increase. But remember, it is present value of cash inflow. It would remain unaffected. Cash inflow would remain unaffected. It would again remain 100. But this value would decrease as we increase the discount rate. The present value of this 130 would decrease. So, if we increase discount rate, the NPV increases in project A. If we increase discount rate, the NPV would decrease in project B. But in case of project C, the scenario is altogether different. You know, this line, this horizontal line, this x-axis, when this line crosses this x-axis, it is our IRR. In case of project B, there was one IRR because this line crosses the horizontal x-axis once. This line crosses horizontal x-axis just once. And that is because there is only one change in sign. But in case of project C, the line crosses this horizontal x-axis twice, so we have two IRR. So now the decision rule is difficult. So should we take this IRR or this one to make our decision? So you get the idea. Then when we have non-conventional cash flows, we would get two IRR. And this is our problem. Again, this is the discussion on conventional cash flows. Project A and project B, it is similar, we have discussed previously. Okay, so non-conventional cash flows. So suppose we have a mining project that requires, this is an example of conventional cash flows, that requires $60 investment. So our initial investment would be $60, it would be minus 60. Our cash inflow for the first year would be 155. So next year we would get 155. In the second year, the mine would be depleted, and the law requires us that we need to refill the mine. We need to close the mine, and for closing the mine, it would again require some capital. So we would again have a negative cash outflow of 100. So now you get this is a non-conventional cash flow, and in this case, what would happen to NPV if we increase the discount rate? So if discount rate is 0, our NPV is minus 5. If we increase discount rate to 10, our NPV is minus 1.45. And if we increase NPV discount rate to 20, it is minus 0.28. At 30, it turns out to be positive. So that means our IRR is somewhere here between 20 and 30. But if you again increase the discount rate to 40, it would again turn out to be negative. So that means there would be another IRR, because IRR is when NPV is 0. So NPV would be 0 between this point, negative and positive, and NPV would be 0 at this point, negative and positive. So we would have two IRRs. Which IRR would we consider? So this is the problem. So we need to solve this problem. And so there are two problems. First problem is the abnormal behavior of NPV. It first turns out to be positive, then it turns to be negative. And then there are multiple internal rate of return problem. And this is how it looks like. We have two IRRs. So let's look at this criteria. If first cash flow is negative and all the remaining cash flow is positive, this is project A in previous example, then we accept if IRR is greater than required rate of return, and we reject if IRR is less than required rate of return. We accept if NPV is positive and reject if NPV is 0. This is what we have understood. This is project B type of cash flows, where first cash flow is positive and the remaining cash flows are negative. In this case, the decision rule for IRR is opposite. You have to remember this. We accept if IRR is less than the required rate of return, and we reject if IRR is greater than the required rate of return. Although the NPV rule would remain same in all cases. Now, in case of project C, when some cash flows after first are positive and some cash flows are negative, then we have no valid IRR. So there is a problem with IRR. There is no problem with NPV. The main problem is with IRR. We have multiple IRRs. So to solve this problem, what we would do is, instead of using IRR when we have non-conventional cash flows, let me repeat this. If we have conventional cash flows, then we can use IRR technique. There is no harm in it. It would give us a single internal rate of return and we can make the decision. But when we have non-conventional cash flows, that is, when the signs of the cash flow would change multiple times, more than once, then the IRR technique would give us multiple IRRs, which is an issue, and we would not be able to make the decision. So for that, for non-conventional cash flows, we need to use modified internal rate of return, MIRR, rather than IRR. So modified internal rate of return is used to address the problem of non-conventional cash flows or unconventional cash flows. And there are different methods that we can use modified IRR. There are three different approaches. First is the discounting approach, then the reinvesting approach, and then the combination approach. But the idea is, whether we use the discounting approach, reinvestment approach, or the combination approach, the idea is that we need to first convert the non-conventional cash flows into conventional cash flows and then calculate the IRR, right? So let's first look at the different approaches. Mainly the first approach seems all right, but we would have a look at the other approaches too. So first the discounting approach. So what do we do in discounting approach? All the negative cash flows are discounted using the required rate of return. So if we have negative cash flow of 100, then we have positive 155, then we have negative say 60. So what we need to do is, we just need to convert all these negative cash flows into present values, discounting them using the required rate of return. So now what would happen is, there would be this minus 100, then minus this present value of the 60, let's say it's 50, let's just assume, and then we would have plus 155. There would be no other cash flows because this had been converted into present value. So if we add them up, then we would have minus 150 and plus 155. Now you would notice that these are conventional cash flows. They are no more non-conventional cash flows. So the step is to convert unconventional or non-conventional cash flows into conventional cash flows and then find IRR. The finding IRR portion would again be similar. We can either use trial and error method or interpolation. The only thing you need to understand in modified IRR is to convert non-conventional cash flows into conventional cash flows. The first approach is discounting approach, where we discount all the negative outflows. So another example, if we had minus 100, again plus 155, minus 60, plus 10, and then minus 20, then what would we do? We would convert this minus 20, we would find present value, we would find the present value of this 60. So all the negative cash flow, remember all the negative cash flows would be discounted. So now we would have minus 100 and in the present value of all these 60 and 20. So we would have negative here, and then we would have positive 155 and positive 10. So only this first value would be negative, whatever the value is. So now again we have converted the non-conventional cash flows into conventional cash flows. Okay, there are other approaches. I'm just going to give you an idea of reinvestment approach, but mainly we are going to use discounting approach. So just for an idea, all negative and positive cash flows are compounded. So they, rather than getting the present value, they are compounding into future values, except for the initial investment, and then we find the IRR. In combination approach, all the negative cash flows are discounted and positive cash flows are compounded, and then we find the, so this would be the formula, future value of the positive cash flows and present value of the negative cash flows. And so once we have the conventional cash flows, we would find the IRR either using trial and error method or either using interpolation method.